Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Gayle Carson. Welcome to Living Regret Free, a program that shows you how to live a better and more joyful life. As an added bonus, I invite you to listen to an introduction to my Mindset Matters program, which ties into this so well. Go to www.sobmindset.com. It's free, and I know you will enjoy it. If you'd like to contact me personally, drop me a line at gaylecarson13@gmail.com or go to my website, www.spunkyoldbroad.com, and sign up for my weekly newsletter.
Hi, everyone. My guest today is Randal Johnson, who goes by RJ. He received a master's degree in finance at UCLA and went on to Wall Street to make a bunch of money. Eventually, he was managing a $15 billion fund, that's with a B, but was so stressed out that he turned to drugs to cope. Eventually, becoming an addict, he lost everything and thought his life was over. But he slowly recovered by completely reprogramming his thinking and belief system. Today, at age 63, and for the past 12 years, he's lived regret-free. He's currently a student at Claremont Graduate University in Southern California, studying philosophy of religion, and he's doing research to establish evidence generalizing the path to total freedom and elimination of personal suffering. Welcome, RJ, and my gosh, that is a big goal.
Welcome to you also, and I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Well, you are certainly welcome. And of course, this show is Living Regret Free. So the first question I have for you is, do you have any regrets?
I have absolutely zero regrets today for anything that's ever happened to me or that I've ever done in my life from the very beginning when I was born.
And you know, that's a big thing, because so many people pine over what they did, why they didn't succeed, where they made mistakes. And you've been able to get rid of all of that because of the work that you've done and the study that you've done. So share a little bit about the graduate studies that you're doing and why and how it's helped you and all of those good things.
Great. So leading up to my studies, let's look back maybe about 15 or 20 years ago. The main emotions that were really causing me suffering in life were areas of my past lives that caused guilt, regret, shame. And then there was always the things about what was going to happen in the future that caused me to have worry, anxiety, and fear. And all of those manifest themselves both mentally, emotionally, and physically in a feeling of stress in every moment of my present life. So as it goes to regret, the way that I had to deal with all of my past events was to develop a philosophy that would help me to change the way I thought and actually physically would change my neural pathways, to change my mind programming so that I could think differently and take those negative emotions and not necessarily totally eliminate them, but the events that were going on in my life, I could reinterpret in a way that helped me to not experience those events in the way of these negative emotions. So what that comes to now is that over these years, I developed a core set of 7 principles that as I adopted them, all of these negative emotions, including regret, were eliminated from my life. And so now in school, what I want to do in studying philosophy, and especially philosophy of religion, is to look at specific areas of various religions to find what doctrines or what principles can help us to relieve ourselves from these negative emotions, including stress.
Interesting, because, I wrote a book, The 9 Secrets of Living Regret Free. And it's interesting because I practice these all the time. And I think I had an advantage and a disadvantage. I had an advantage because I was brought up in a very loving home, disciplined, but loving. And so I was forced to face whatever happened in a daily, and I'm talking about very young, whatever happened on a daily basis, I just had to face it and deal with it. So I was really brought up in realism, and whatever comes into your life, you deal with. And so when people go through all of these things, it's difficult for me because I either deal with it or it's gone. There's nothing that really lingers and I say, oh, I wish. I mean, am I sorry about some things? Of course, but they don't have an effect on me on how I live my life. Now, with you, you believe religion can coexist with science. So what area of science are you talking about? And can it explain why so many do live with regrets?
The area of science that I'm most specifically interested in is neuroscience, because as I mentioned, it's all about changing our mind programming. And in neuroscience, we can actually look at the brain, look at the way the brain is functioning, synaptic responses, the reticular activating system, for example, and be able to look at how we can actually affect the brain by, say, probes or using binaural beat frequencies, meditation, these kinds of things that can actually physically change the brain waves. So neuroscience is important to me. And also, interestingly, quantum physics has some theories now that talk about how particles in the universe interact. Of course, we are made all of just particles when you get down to the very basics. So all of our brain matter, everything is moving in certain ways that heretofore really weren't understood. But now with quantum physics, we can see how these particles interact, especially in producing thoughts and beliefs.
It's interesting. I'm sure I would be fascinated by images of what's going on in my mind because my brain is constantly working, but I am the biggest proponent of positive mindset and positive thinking that you'll find. I'm going through a lot of my stuff because I'm going to be moving and I am trying to pare down, which is not an easy thing for me to do. And I've been going over some of my writings and things like that from like 20 years ago. And even then, I was talking about the same things I talk about now with positive thinking, positive mindset, looking at things in a particular way. But you've got a book coming out soon called The 7 Secrets of a Stress-Free Life. Can you share with us one or two of those secrets?
Sure. Interestingly, as I said, the principles were developed not necessarily say focused on things like stress, but we're focused more on philosophical principles, areas of thinking or religious thought. However, as I shared these things, originally they were called wisdom principles. And not to get into it, but I have taken what's called a bodhisattva vow, which is part of Mahayana Buddhism. And in the course of that, my friends just couldn't relate to it. So one of them said, if you're going to, quote, teach or preach even these wisdom principles, you have to do it in a way that people are attracted to it. So I created a commercial method. I totally sold out my philosophy and my spirituality and turned it into a pop culture book and just focus on stress. And of course, now it's very popular because, well, who's my target market? Pretty much like 1 billion people. And so it makes it a lot easier for me to expand my message across the globe even. Now,
it's interesting, RJ, because you did a very smart thing. You went to people who said, "What? What are you doing? What are you talking about?" And we all think we know it all. We think we know. Oh, I've got this great vision and this great philosophy and this great way of everything, and then we go to somebody and they look at us and say, what are you talking about? So you went to people who you admire, who you respect, and they said, you need to change this, and you listened and you did, but you're still getting your message across, which is the most important thing and the thing that you want to do. You want people to listen to what it is you have to say, but you're saying it now in a commercial way that people understand. So I think that's terrific. I think that's wonderful. So I'm still looking for my 2 secrets. Can you give me 2 secrets?
Sure. Probably as it relates to what we're talking about today would be my very first secret, the principle that says take total responsibility for everything in your life. So think about it in the area of regrets or worry or anxiety. When we want to blame others or rationalize something, we're not really getting at who we really are, what's really going inside of us in our thinking. But when we take responsibility, then we can say, okay, I have created this situation in my life, and now I'm empowered to do something about it. Very similar to what you're talking about. I can change my thinking. I can create more of a positive outlook. The other secret is my very last secret, and that's something that I think we've referenced before, and that is love yourself first, then others. And what I found is that a person that really doesn't have a lot of self-love, that kind of beating themselves up, low self-esteem, they really have no opportunity to have that freedom from their negative emotions. And so they're going to be stuck in regret until at least when they love themselves enough to really be able to look in the mirror and like or love that person that's looking at them. That's when they can eliminate things like regret.
Boy, it's interesting that you should say that, because I was just talking to someone on one of my other shows, and I said the one thing that my mom always said to me was that I had to be able to look in the mirror and say, I like you and I love you before I could like or love anybody else. So I was taught that at a very young age. However, I think, what you have said is so important, and that is we have to take responsibility. I mean, we love to blame other people. I mean, it's wonderful to say, well, he didn't pick up the phone, or she didn't give me a chance, or they passed me over for a promotion for no good reason and I deserve it. But it's still, we have to take responsibility. And one of the things that if you are in a position at work where you are passed over and over again, maybe it's a message and you need to start thinking about moving to some other place. And if you stay there, then you're taking what people give you. And so I think that it's really important what you say. And of course, loving ourselves is very important. We can't move on until we do love ourselves. So what role do you think regrets play in personal suffering? And I guess the bigger and the deeper question is, why do people choose to suffer? That's always been my question. Why hold on to something that is giving you so much pain?
Well, psychologists would say, especially somebody crazy like Freud, that it all goes back to our birth and our family of origin and how we were raised. You mentioned that you were raised in a loving and positive environment. Yes, that's true. But even something simple as when you were 1 or 2 years old and you tried to do something that, was dangerous and your parents said, no, kind of a thing, then you immediately start having these negative feelings like fear. Why is there no? I'm scared by the sound of it, even if I don't understand the word. And so this programming really happens despite any effort that humans can make as they grow up. And so we're just taught to have things like fear. And as we have those experiences or those emotions, the suffering is going to exist unless you're just completely raised in an environment where there's no negativity. Well, maybe that happens in Tibet or some deep monastery in Thailand, but in the United States, it's just not going to be possible. And so I think it's inevitable and maybe necessary that as we grow up, we're going to experience, a life of some sort of suffering. It could be physical, it could be mental, it could be emotional.
Well, I do. I mean, I certainly have had disappointments in my life, and I certainly have had, I was raised, my sister and I are really close, but she's 5 years older than I and totally different. I mean, we're a lot like in many things, but we're very different in what we like to do and, things like that. And she was like a math whiz, and in fact, she has a genius IQ. And me, I'm all about theater and stage and dancing and performing, and that was not her thing. And so everywhere I went, it was, why can't you be more like your sister? And but she never did anything to me. She was wonderful to me, and so it was interesting. And I didn't realize that people were saying to her, well, why aren't you more outgoing, like Gayle? And why aren't you, on stage like Gayle? So it's interesting. And to this day, I mean, she's, 5 years older, as I say, and, she's now 86, I'm 81. And she has won, I think, five, not one, but been awarded 5 Lifetime Achievement Awards. I've been awarded 4. And here we are following the same pattern, and yet we're so totally different. It's really interesting to look at. But you've got something else that you said that I'm curious about. You said you do not believe that there is suffering in the world. So explain that a little bit further.
Well, before I do that, I just want to add an interesting sideline is I have an older brother, and he's 5 years older than me, and he is an architect. He has this incredible art skill and just the ability to have vision and perceive things, and I am an analytical person. As you mentioned, when I was in school, I studied finance, I studied math, I studied all of these kind of science and so forth. So exactly like you, there was always a comparison with my 5-year-old brother. And fortunately, he was a nice guy and he didn't torture me too much. Just a couple of his friends might get together and make life a little miserable for me. The other thing I did want to caution or to clarify is when we talk about taking responsibility, and we really don't have control over many of the events in our life. These external events can happen to us. We can get ill, or like you said, at work, we can have a mean boss that there's nothing we can do about it. So I don't want to give the impression that there is no adversity or no suffering in life in the sense of events or circumstances. Somebody could get cancer or some other really negative kind of adversity. It's just that we have the control over how we respond to these events. And so in the sense of suffering, we're responding to the events by creating some sort of negative interpretation. And if we want to eliminate suffering, we simply need to see those events in a way that doesn't produce that kind of feeling. And again, it comes down to our mind programming. So a quick example would be someone like the most incredible example to me is Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor of a concentration camp. And he was an existentialist. He invented the idea of logotherapy. And he was able to just pass through these years of existing in the most horrible conditions, and yet he just didn't feel that as suffering. So somebody like that really can teach us how we can perceive events not as suffering. So when I say I don't believe in suffering, I believe that there are very negative events that we can't control, but we can control how we see those events. So maybe I could just give you one easy example that applies to people here in Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's called driving on the freeway. So
well, you should come to Miami. It's just as bad here.
Okay. So LA does not have a public transit system, very limited. And so there's millions of cars and the freeways are always jammed. Last night I went to LAX to pick up my daughter at 11:45. And just from the tunnel that is just outside entering into the terminals to the terminal, it took me 45 minutes. It moved at about 1 or 2 miles an hour. So it doesn't matter day or night. LA traffic is really a mess. And even while I was in that traffic last night, there were people honking and cutting in and getting mad and hand gestures. Okay, so why is it that I went through that exact same experience? I thought it was interesting. I was even laughing at some of the people. So the idea is that we want to create a different mind program. So rather than see that person as rude, an idiot, mean, I just create a different interpretation. In this case, the person that was the most rude as a driver, I just looked at that and maybe one of two ideas. He is trying to get there to meet his wife who's pregnant, could be delivering a baby at any moment. And therefore, if I see that, I really want to let him get ahead. I want him to get to his terminal faster. And the other thing might just be he's having a bad day. He just got fired or some other thing where he's just overwhelmed and he really isn't thinking clearly. And so when you look at those things, you can have compassion or even encouragements for someone. It really is just how we interpret the events.
Well, and that's true, and also being prepared for it. I mean, for example, you know that when you hit the road in LA, it's going to be traffic, and so you allow yourself the time or whatever. I know that when I have to go, for example, from Miami to Fort Lauderdale, if I go anytime after 3:30, it's going to be horrible traffic. If I can manage to do it between 1 and 3, of course, which never happens because meetings are not at that time, it's going to be it's going to be a different story. So I think you're right. It's all in the mindset, and I think it's important. You also, in your book, have a chapter called The Effortless Stress Elimination Formula. So is what you just said how you do that, or is there another methodology of practice?
The idea is if you read most stress management books or programs, they talk about what you can do to relieve stress. Things like meditation, sleep better, exercise, eat better. They're always things that you have to do. Well, most of us aren't able to do them. And that's why we have this life of adversity and stress. And so, what can we do to change our mindset that doesn't require us to have some sort of thing that we have to do to make effort? So, in my method of relieving stress, or in this case, negative emotions, is to have a 3-step process. And the first is just to recognize that, hey, I'm in a situation where I'm angry or I'm worried or I have fear. And once we can recognize it, which most people are just in it and blind, then we can say, okay, I am that way. And then the next phase, as we do that enough, is while we're in it, instead of seeing it after the fact. Hey, right now I'm angry. Okay, what can I do about that? And then in the third step, we actually see it coming. Here's a situation I can see is going to affect me in a negative way. What can I do right now to change my mindset? And so as we go through those 3 steps, all we have to do is think about it and recognize it. And again, it's amazing, but human beings have the capacity to do these changes. It's all about self-awareness. So in the effortless stress elimination formula, the core idea is that you raise your self-awareness, that you create an observer function that sits in the back of your mind, and he's watching everything you're doing. And when you do something that's, kind of stupid, because why am I doing that to myself? It just laughs at you and says, hey, you're being stupid. And so then we can say, yeah, I shouldn't be thinking that way. And then in the formula, there's particular things that these 7 principles, you just ask yourself, am I taking responsibility in this minute? Am I not being able to be right? I have to make somebody wrong, and so on. And when you see that, you can say, oh, what is the opposite of that? And the book talks about what the opposite things are. And then you just think those things. And over time, you're just slowly reprogramming your mind.
Well, RJ, we're coming to the end of the show, and I want people to know how to get in touch with you and how to get your book and so forth. So what's the best way for people to find you and get your book and maybe use some of these techniques that we've talked about?
Right now, I'm launching a website that is called eliminatemystress.com. And so that's the easiest way. If you go to eliminatemystress.com, it will provide for you like an ebook and some other things that will give you a core beginning to that program. And once you're at that place and you download that free ebook, there will be an opportunity to actually set up a live consultation with me, totally free. And I promise that I won't just turn it into a sales pitch, but basically I turn it into, let's spend 5 minutes, talk about your stress, talk about your regrets, whatever negative emotion, and I guide them through the formula and begin to teach them how they can apply these principles. And no obligation, but if they then later want to do more work, I have things like workshops and group coaching and things like that. But just go to eliminatemystress.com and you'll find everything that you need to get.
Well, that's great. So folks, go to eliminateyourstress.com, download his free ebook, because that'll be an aid to you immediately. And then once you do that, if you decide you want to have a conversation with him, you can do that. If you want to get his book, you can do that. But at least go there and find out, if that's something that you really want to work with RJ with. I think it's really an interesting thing to have someone that you can kind of bounce ideas off of and see if you're in the same ballpark or if that's working for you. And I think that's important. RJ, this has really been fascinating and interesting. And I can't imagine what your dissertation, if you're doing one, what that's going to turn out to be. I know when I did my dissertation for my doctorate, I had to rewrite it 11 times. It was not a happy experience, but I'm a creative writer as opposed to this is how you're supposed to really do a dissertation type of writing. So
Yeah.
it
My
was a
professor,
challenge.
I'll just say my professor said, you'll be in your 70s by the time you get done with that. And one other clarification, it's a little tricky. It's not eliminateyourstress.com, it's eliminatemystress.com.
Oh, eliminatemystress.com. Okay, folks, eliminatemystress.com. That's where you need to go to find out more. And RJ, thanks so much for being with us today. I know that our listeners really enjoyed it, and the best to you in the future.
Thank you so much. I really had a fun time today. Thanks for inviting me, Gayle.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's show. I choose my guests carefully, so if you have someone you'd like me to interview, please drop me a line at gaylecarson13@gmail.com. In the meantime, check out my intro program, Mindset Matters, at www.sobmindset.com. See you next week.